July 10, 1944. The Norman village of Aderville, southwest of Caen. Through the morning mist and smoke of artillery bombardment, a young German Oberleutnant named Cornelius Tauber crouches in a forward trench alongside soldiers of the 736th Infantry Regiment. They have endured 6 weeks of relentless Allied pressure since the landings began, but nothing has prepared them for what emerges from the haze that morning. A Churchill tank advances along the road, but something is wrong. Behind it, connected by an armored pipe, rolls a strange wheeled trailer. The hull machine gun position has been modified, replaced by an unusual projector. Then, without warning, the projector erupts. A jet of burning liquid, orange and yellow, arcs through the air for more than 100 meters. It strikes the German position with the force of industrial fire, flowing like water into every crevice of their defenses. Years after the war, Tauber would recall that moment with visceral clarity. The heat was so intense he could not breathe properly, even though the flames were 20 meters away. The burning liquid filled the trench completely. A dozen men were incinerated where they stood. The smell of gasoline was sickening. He watched, struck dumb by the apparition before him, as the weapon they called the Flammenpanzer demonstrated its horrific power. The psychological effect was immediate and total. German soldiers who had held their positions against conventional artillery and tank fire for weeks surrendered en masse at the first sight of this new weapon. Some positions gave up after merely witnessing ranging shots, unwilling to risk what they knew would follow. This was the Churchill Crocodile, and it had just announced its presence on the battlefields of Normandy. The story of the Crocodile begins not with fire, but with failure. In August 1942, the beaches of Dieppe became a charnel house for Allied forces. Canadian and British troops, supported by the new Churchill tanks, attempted an amphibious assault on the fortified French port. The operation was a disaster. Of the 6,000 men who landed, more than half became casualties within hours. The Churchill tanks that made it ashore found themselves trapped on the shingle beaches, unable to overcome the concrete obstacles and fortified positions that dominated every approach. German machine gunners and artillery observers, safe in their bunkers, methodically destroyed the trapped armor. The lessons learned at Dieppe were written in blood, but they would prove invaluable for the invasion that would come 2 years later. In the aftermath of Dieppe, British military planners confronted an uncomfortable truth. The German Atlantic Wall, which Hitler was constructing along thousands of miles of European coastline, represented a level of fortification not seen since the trenches of the First World War. Concrete bunkers, steel obstacles, interconnected firing positions, and elaborate trench networks protected by multiple layers of barbed wire and mines. Traditional infantry assaults would be suicidal. Standard tank guns, even the heaviest available, could not reliably penetrate the reinforced concrete shelters. Artillery bombardment alone had proven insufficient. Something new was required, something that could reach into the fortifications themselves and compel their defenders either to flee or to die. Enter Major General Percy Hobart, a brilliant and controversial figure who had already created 2 of Britain's finest armored divisions. Hobart had been forced into retirement in 1940 due to his unorthodox views on armored warfare, reduced to serving as a corporal in the Home Guard despite his rank and experience. Only Winston Churchill's personal intervention brought him back to active duty. In March 1943, when the 79th Armored Division faced disbandment, Churchill and Chief of the Imperial General Staff Alan Brooke had a different vision. They gave Hobart command of the division with a singular mission: develop the specialized armored vehicles that would solve the seemingly impossible problems of amphibious assault against heavily fortified positions. The vehicles his division would create became known, with a mixture of affection and dark humor, as Hobart's Funnies. These were not merely modifications, but reimaginings of what armored vehicles could accomplish. Sherman tanks fitted with canvas screens and propellers to swim ashore. Churchill tanks mounting massive spigot mortars that could hurl 40-pound demolition charges at concrete bunkers. Mine-clearing flail tanks that beat the ground ahead with weighted chains. bridge layers and fascine carriers that could cross anti-tank ditches, armored bulldozers to clear obstacles. Each vehicle addressed a specific tactical problem that conventional armor could not solve. But among all of Hobart's innovations, one stood apart for the sheer terror it inspired. The Churchill Crocodile was not just another weapon, it was a psychological instrument of warfare, a mechanical nightmare that weaponized humanity's most primal fear. The technical specifications tell only part of the story. The Crocodile was based on the Churchill Mark VII, already one of the most heavily armored infantry tanks in the British arsenal. Its thick armor could withstand direct hits from most German anti-tank weapons, and its wide tracks gave it exceptional cross-country mobility. The conversion replaced the hull-mounted Besa machine gun with a flame projector, but critically, the Crocodile retained its turret-mounted 75mm gun. This meant it could function as both a conventional battle tank and a flamethrower platform, switching roles as the tactical situation demanded. Behind the tank, connected by an armored pipe that ran along the underside of the hull, rolled a 6.5-ton trailer carrying 1,800 liters of thickened fuel and compressed gas propellant. The fuel itself was a terrible innovation, a petroleum jelly mixture that stuck to whatever it touched and burned with fierce intensity. It could be projected at a rate of 4 imperial gallons per second to an effective range of 120 yards, far exceeding any man-portable flamethrower. The weapon could fire approximately 81-second bursts before the trailer was exhausted. The fuel burned on water. It clung to concrete, wood, earth, and human flesh with equal tenacity. Once ignited, it was nearly impossible to extinguish. The trailer could be jettisoned if it was hit or once empty, giving the tank greater freedom of movement. But its mere presence behind a Churchill was enough to identify the vehicle as a Crocodile, and that identification alone was sufficient to break the morale of defending troops. Production of the Crocodile conversion kit began in October 1943, just in time for the Normandy invasion. 800 kits were manufactured, though 250 were held in reserve for possible operations against Japanese fortifications in the Pacific. The design was elegant in its practicality. The conversion kit could theoretically be installed by Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers workshops in the field, transforming any available Churchill Mark VII into a Crocodile. In practice, this was rarely done. The specialized training required to operate the weapon meant that Crocodiles were allocated to designated units whose crews had been specifically prepared for their use. The 79th Armored Division became the primary operator, with units like the 141st Regiment Royal Armored Corps, the Buffs, training relentlessly for the role they would play. The secrecy surrounding the Crocodile was absolute. British intelligence understood that the weapon's greatest power lay in surprise and psychological impact. Disabled Crocodiles that could not be recovered were to be destroyed by any means necessary, even by airstrike if required. Aspects of the mechanism were classified at the highest levels. The Germans knew that Britain had experimented with flamethrower tanks. Earlier vehicles like the Churchill OK had been used at Dieppe, though with limited success. But the Crocodile represented a quantum leap in capability and reliability. When the first Crocodiles went into action, the German defenders had no idea such a weapon existed, and the effect was precisely what British planners had hoped for. Total shock, followed by immediate surrender or disintegration of defensive positions that had held for days or weeks against conventional assault. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history unfolds across 5 beaches in Normandy. Among the thousands of vehicles coming ashore are elements of Hobart's 79th Armored Division, including Crocodiles of Sea Squadron 141st Regiment. 13 troop landed at La Rivière and 15 troop at Le Hamel, supporting the assault battalions pushing inland from the beaches. On D-Day itself, the Crocodile's flamethrowers were not initially employed. The chaos of the landings, the focus on getting off the beaches, and the tactical situation did not immediately call for their use, but that would change within hours. On June 7th, 13 Troop received orders to support the 7th Battalion, Green Howards, in clearing German defensive positions inland from the beach. For the first time in combat, the crocodiles fired their flame projectors at enemy fortifications. The result was immediate and dramatic. 150 German soldiers emerged from their positions under white flags, surrendering rather than face the weapon they had just witnessed. No further shots were necessary. The defensive position that might have required hours of fighting and significant casualties to reduce had been neutralized in minutes by the mere demonstration of the crocodile's capability. Word spread rapidly among German units. A new British weapon had arrived, something that made even the strongest bunker into a death trap. Throughout June and July, crocodiles supported operations across the Normandy front. Near Fontenay-le-Pesnel and Tilly-sur-Seulles, they cleared German strongpoints. At Caen, the ruined medieval city that became the focal point of some of the bloodiest fighting in Normandy, crocodiles worked alongside Churchill Avars and other specialized armor to break through defensive positions that conventional forces had been unable to penetrate. The tactical employment followed a pattern refined through bitter experience. When facing a stubborn bunker or fortified building, the crocodile would first fire ranging shots with its main gun, demonstrating that it was a fully functional tank. Then, at close range, the flame projector would erupt. The defenders had seconds to make a choice: surrender or be consumed by fire. The psychological effect cannot be overstated. German soldiers were veterans, many of them. They had faced artillery barrages, aerial bombardment, tank assaults, and infantry attacks. They understood war. But the crocodile represented something different, something visceral. Fire is humanity's oldest fear, embedded in our evolutionary history. To be burned alive is universally recognized as one of the worst possible deaths, prolonged and agonizing. The crocodile weaponized that fear with industrial efficiency. Soldiers who might have held their positions against any conventional weapon found themselves unable to function when confronted with the reality of the crocodile. Even battle-hardened SS troops, indoctrinated with Nazi ideology and trained to fight to the death, surrendered when they saw the distinctive trailer and flame projector. The crocodile's impact went beyond individual engagements. Its presence on the battlefield forced German commanders to alter their defensive strategies. Anti-tank fire, already concentrated on British armor, became even more focused when a crocodile was identified. German soldiers knew that destroying the crocodile before it could employ its flame weapon was essential. The trailer, while armored, was a vulnerability. A direct hit could ignite the fuel inside, though the design included safety features to allow quick jettisoning. But the psychological pressure worked both ways. German gunners, knowing what the crocodile represented, sometimes panicked when engaging it, their aim affected by the knowledge of what would happen if they failed to stop it before it reached their position. There was a darker consequence for the crocodile crews. The weapon was considered so terrible, so outside the normal bounds of warfare, that captured crocodile crewmen faced summary execution. There is at least one documented case of a disabled crocodile's crew being executed on the spot by German forces. This was not official policy, but rather the spontaneous revenge of soldiers who had witnessed what the weapon could do to their comrades. The crews of the crocodiles understood the risk they faced. They operated with the knowledge that surrender might not be an option if their tank was knocked out. Yet they continued their mission, understanding the crucial role they played in reducing fortified positions and saving the lives of the infantry they supported. The Battle of Caen exemplified the crocodile's strategic importance. The city, a D-Day objective for British forces, had not fallen on the first day as planned. Instead, it became the site of grinding urban warfare that lasted for weeks. German forces, including elite panzer divisions and fanatical Hitler Youth units, defended every street, every building, every ruin with desperate ferocity. The medieval city was reduced to rubble by Allied bombing and artillery, but the rubble itself became a defensive asset, creating countless positions for German machine guns and anti-tank weapons. Into this nightmare landscape came the specialized armor of the 79th Division. Operation Epsom in late June saw crocodiles supporting the push to capture high ground south of Caen, particularly Hill 112, which Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself had identified as the key to controlling Normandy. the hill changed hands multiple times in savage fighting. At Ederville, a village in the approach to Hill 112, crocodiles of the 141st Regiment supported the 4th Battalion, Dorsetshire Regiment, and the 5th Battalion, Dorsetshire Regiment, in their assault on German positions. The presence of the crocodiles, breaking their months-long secrecy, shattered the morale of the German defenders. The Dorsets signaled the capture of Château de Fontaine by 6:15 in the morning, far faster than expected, as German soldiers abandoned positions they might otherwise have defended to the death. The existence of the crocodiles in Normandy had been a closely guarded secret. Until their deployment in operations like Epsom, the German forces had no idea such a weapon existed in the Allied arsenal. The only feature distinguishing a crocodile from an ordinary Churchill tank was the fuel trailer, and even that was not obviously different at a distance. But once the flame projector ignited, producing 120-yard jets of fire and oily black smoke that consumed everything in their path, there could be no doubt. The psychological impact of this revelation rippled through German units. If the British had developed such a weapon in secret, what else might they possess? The already difficult task of defending against overwhelming Allied material superiority became even more daunting. Operation Jupiter in mid-July saw continued use of crocodiles in the battle for Hill 112. Supporting units of the 15th Scottish Division, including the 6th Battalion, Royal Scots Fusiliers, crocodiles helped assault positions held by the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, some of the most fanatical troops in the German order of battle. The fighting at Saint-Monvieux-Nord on June 26th demonstrated both the capability and the necessity of the crocodile. German defenders from the Hitler Youth Division fought house to house, refusing to surrender, making every building a fortress. The flamethrowers equipped on the Churchill Crocodiles were essential to reducing this resistance. The combats were extremely violent, sometimes ending in hand-to-hand fighting, but the ability of the crocodiles to reach into defensive positions and force their occupants out meant that British casualties, while still significant, were far lower than they would have been with conventional assault methods alone. The crocodile's effectiveness was not limited to the British sectors of the front. American forces, initially skeptical of Hobart's specialized armor, came to appreciate the crocodile's unique capabilities. British crocodiles supported United States Army units at the Battle for Brest, where the French port city had been converted into a fortress by German defenders. They operated during Operation Clipper, the Anglo-American assault on Geilenkirchen. In each engagement, the pattern repeated. Fortified positions that might have required days of fighting and heavy casualties were neutralized in hours or even minutes by the judicious application of the crocodile's primary weapon. The Americans had been offered crocodile conversion kits before D-Day. The British undertook to supply 100 kits, and a prototype Sherman crocodile was constructed. The design had to be modified because the flame projector could not be fitted in place of the Hull machine gun as it had been on the Churchill. Instead, it was mounted on a platform to the right of the hull gunner under an armored housing, with the fuel line running alongside the hull under armored cover. 6 production examples were under construction, but American interest waned. They adopted their own flame variant of the Sherman, which performed poorly in combat compared to the crocodile. Eventually, 4 Sherman crocodiles were supplied to the United States 739th Tank Battalion. These were used during Operation Grenade against the heavily defended 13th-century citadel in the town of Jülich. After extensive use of both their flame projectors and main guns, the American crocodiles were able to force the German defenders to surrender, but by then the Normandy campaign was over and the Allies were fighting inside Germany itself. The technical challenges of operating a crocodile were considerable. Refueling the trailer took at least 90 minutes. Pressurizing the system required around 15 minutes. The pressure had to be primed on the trailer by the crew as close to use as possible because it could not be maintained for very long. This meant that crocodiles could not remain in a ready-to-fire state indefinitely. They had to be carefully positioned and prepared for the specific assault they would support. The fuel line connecting the tank to the trailer, while armored, was still a potential vulnerability. If severed, the weapon was useless until the connection could be repaired. The trailer itself, weighing 6.5 tons when full, affected the tank's maneuverability, particularly when reversing. Crews had to be highly trained not only in the operation of the flame weapon, but in managing the tactical limitations the system imposed. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because overcoming them demonstrated the dedication of the British to solving the problem of fortified defenses, the Crocodile achieved a reputation that far exceeded the actual number produced. Fewer than 800 conversion kits were manufactured. Many were held in reserve. The number of Crocodiles actually engaged in combat operations in Northwest Europe was relatively small, perhaps 200 or fewer at any given time. Yet the weapon's impact on German morale was profound and widespread. German soldiers feared the Crocodile more than they feared the Tiger tank or the 88mm gun or the Allied fighter bombers that dominated the skies. Those weapons could kill efficiently, but the Crocodile could burn you alive, and that distinction mattered in ways that transcended rational tactical assessment. After the breakout from Normandy, Crocodiles continued to serve throughout the Northwest European campaign. They supported the Allied advance through France and Belgium. Sea Squadron supported the 53rd Welsh Division in their assault on Hertogenbosch in October 1944. In Italy, the 25th Armored Assault Brigade operated Crocodiles, using them to reduce German defensive positions in the difficult terrain of the Italian peninsula. The weapon proved as effective in the Mediterranean theater as it had in France, though the number of Crocodiles deployed to Italy was much smaller. Wherever the Allies encountered fortified German positions, the Crocodile demonstrated its terrible utility. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. But the Churchill Crocodile service was not finished. 250 conversion kits had been held in reserve for potential operations against Japanese fortifications in the Pacific. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Japan's subsequent surrender meant these Crocodiles were never deployed against their intended targets. But in a grim postscript to the European War, Crocodiles were mobilized for a different purpose entirely. They were used to burn down and sterilize the site of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, destroying the barracks and buildings where tens of thousands had died from disease, starvation, and deliberate murder. The weapon designed to break the will of enemy soldiers was employed to eradicate the physical remnants of one of history's greatest crimes. Then came an unexpected revival of the Crocodile's military career. In June 1950, the Korean War erupted. British forces, including Sea Squadron of the 7th Royal Tank Regiment, equipped with Churchill Crocodiles, deployed to the Korean Peninsula as part of the 29th Brigade. The Crocodile proved effective against North Korean and Chinese fortifications, though the nature of the warfare in Korea, with its mobile front lines and mountainous terrain, was quite different from the set-piece assaults in Normandy. The Crocodiles remained in Korea until 1951, when they were withdrawn and finally retired from active service. This made them one of the last Churchill variants to see combat, a testament to the basic soundness of the Churchill design and to the continuing tactical relevance of the flamethrower concept. The legacy of the Churchill Crocodile extends far beyond its service life. It represented a philosophy of combined arms warfare that recognized the limitations of conventional weapons against prepared defenses. The Crocodile was never meant to fight other tanks or to conduct breakthrough operations in open country. It had a specific mission to reduce fortified positions and to break the will of determined defenders, and it accomplished that mission with remarkable efficiency. Modern militaries still employ flame weapons in various forms, from thermobaric weapons to incendiary shells, acknowledging that some tactical problems require fire as a solution. The psychological dimension of warfare, the understanding that breaking enemy morale is as important as destroying enemy forces, remains a central principle of military doctrine. Hobart's funnies, collectively, changed the nature of amphibious warfare. The Crocodile was only one element of a comprehensive system designed to overcome specific obstacles. But among all the specialized vehicles that came ashore on D-Day and fought through Northwest Europe, the Crocodile stands out for the sheer existential dread it inspired. German soldiers who fought against every other type of Allied weapon learned to respect them, to fear them in the way that professional soldiers fear effective armament. But the crocodile was different. It touched something deeper, more primal. The fear it generated was not merely tactical, but visceral, rooted in humanity's most ancient nightmares. Today, Churchill crocodiles survive in museums around the world: the Tank Museum at Bovington, the Muckleburgh Collection, the D-Day Museum in Portsmouth, and institutions in Canada, Australia, Russia, and the United States preserve these vehicles for future generations. At the American Heritage Museum in Hudson, Massachusetts, one crocodile is maintained in running order, its engine still capable of propelling its massive bulk, though its flame projector is long since deactivated. Visitors stand before these machines and try to imagine what it must have been like to face such a weapon in combat. The technical specifications are impressive, the historical significance undeniable, but something ineffable is lost when the weapon is silent and still. The soldiers who crouched in bunkers and trenches across occupied Europe, who saw the distinctive trailer and flame projector, who made the terrible choice between surrender and a death by fire, they understood the crocodile in a way that no museum display can convey. For them, it was not a piece of military technology or a curiosity of specialized armor. It was the incarnation of industrial age warfare's capacity to transform the elements themselves into weapons, to take fire from its natural context and project it with mechanical precision at ranges that seemed impossible. It was proof that in total war, even the most terrible possibilities would be explored and implemented if they offered tactical advantage. The Churchill Crocodile operated for less than 2 years in active combat. Its production numbers were modest. The actual tonnage of fortifications it destroyed, measured purely in concrete and steel, was probably not significantly greater than what conventional tanks and artillery accomplished. But the weapon's true impact cannot be measured in such terms. The crocodile saved countless Allied lives by compelling German defenders to surrender rather than fight to the death. It broke the will of veteran soldiers and elite units, forcing them to make the rational calculation that no defensive position, however strong, was worth dying in if the crocodile could reach it. It accelerated the reduction of fortified areas, shortening operations and reducing the time Allied forces remained exposed to German counterfire. When historians assess the factors that enabled the Allied victory in Northwest Europe, they cite material superiority, air supremacy, naval support, the quality of Allied planning, the skill of commanders, and the courage of soldiers. All of these were essential. But in the specific tactical context of reducing fortified German positions, the Churchill Crocodile stands as one of the most effective weapons the Allies employed. Its mere existence, once revealed, changed the calculations of German defenders across the front. Units that might have held out for days, inflicting heavy casualties on attacking forces, chose instead to surrender when they learned a crocodile was approaching their position. Major General Percy Hobart, the brilliant and controversial officer who made the crocodile possible, received Winston Churchill's personal commendation for the weapon's success. The Prime Minister wrote to him in 1944, expressing satisfaction that the Churchill Crocodile flamethrower had justified Hobart's hopes. It was understated praise for a weapon that had fundamentally altered the tactical balance in Northwest Europe. Hobart went on to command the Specialized Armor Development Establishment after the war, continuing to explore innovations in armored warfare. His legacy is secure, not merely because of the crocodile, but because of his entire vision of specialized armor operating in support of combined arms assault. The German soldiers who survived encounters with the crocodile carried their memories for the rest of their lives. In post-war interviews, when asked about their most feared Allied weapons, many immediately mentioned the flamethrower tanks. Cornelius Tauber, the Oberleutnant who witnessed the crocodile at Ytterville, described it decades later with the same visceral horror he felt as a young officer. The image of the burning trench, the men incinerated where they stood, the heat that made breathing difficult even at a safe distance. These memories remained vivid long after other details of the campaign had faded. For the generation of German soldiers who fought in Normandy, the Churchill Crocodile became a symbol of Allied technological superiority and of the terrifying effectiveness of industrial warfare. The weapon raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of warfare and the limits of acceptable methods. Flamethrowers have long been controversial. International law has generally not banned their use against military targets, but the manner of death they inflict is widely regarded as particularly inhumane. The Crocodile was designed to maximize psychological impact as much as physical destruction. It succeeded brilliantly in both objectives. Does the fact that it saved Allied lives by compelling surrenders justify its use? Does the alternative, prolonged fighting with conventional weapons that would have killed more soldiers on both sides, make the Crocodile's terrible efficiency a moral positive? These are not easy questions, and the answers depend on philosophical and ethical frameworks that remain contested. What is indisputable is that the Churchill Crocodile represented the culmination of a particular approach to warfare, one that sought to apply overwhelming force at the decisive point to break enemy resistance as quickly as possible. It embodied the industrial power's capacity to transform any material, even fire itself, into a weapon of war. It demonstrated that specialized equipment, properly employed by trained personnel in the right tactical context, could have effects far beyond what its modest production numbers might suggest. And it proved that in the calculus of war, psychological impact can be as important as kinetic effect, that breaking the enemy's will to fight is sometimes more valuable than simply destroying his fortifications. The Churchill Crocodile earned its place in history not merely as an unusual tank or an interesting footnote to the story of D-Day. It became one of the defining weapons of the Northwest European campaign, a symbol of Allied ingenuity and determination, and a nightmare that German infantry learned to fear above almost all other instruments of war. When the trailer appeared behind a Churchill tank, when the modified hull became visible, when the flame projector oriented toward a German position, the soldiers who witnessed these signs knew what was coming. They had seconds to decide: surrender or face the fire. For most, the choice was obvious. The Churchill Crocodile had achieved its purpose. It had made even the strongest fortification untenable, and in doing so, it had changed the nature of defensive warfare itself. That is its legacy. Terrible and effective in equal measure, a weapon that saved lives by threatening the most horrific death imaginable.